microphones there, so.
I am really excited about badges, but I'm trying to figure out, and maybe we need to discuss this later, how we could develop badges for the homeschoolers that parents are not, especially in the high school, they're not as, they tend to hand over the kids to co-ops and then they go back to basic book learning and they're not doing as much interactive. But I see the badges coming alongside, just really helping the teenagers to be excited about algebra or, world history or something, and make it more interactive. So do we just go to the Smithsonian Quest and introduce that, or can we set up a program for the homeschoolers?
You can definitely set up a program for the homeschoolers if you want, but the other is that the Smithsonian Quest is available to anybody. It's free. If you get on there right now, you can already start to use that as well. And so really, a lot of it's content-based. If you have a group of homeschoolers or an association of homeschoolers who want to think about, like, what are the badges that you would like to offer in terms of motivation, it may be a good thing to think about it in terms of as an overall system. Because the thinking is that, yes, there can be millions of badges out there, and they will mean different things to different people. So in terms of the homeschool aspect of, which badges, if you got a badge from the Smithsonian, and teachers are counting it, they will probably, and you can count those too as well, like colleges may accept those too. And so there's this ecosystem that is still in the beginnings of being built, but this will be a part of it. So that's a really good question.
Thank you.
Are there comments, questions for us?
So my name's Elizabeth. Hello. You both
Welcome,
mentioned
Elizabeth.
you both mentioned some innovations that are happening in out of school time, and you also had some examples of, for instance, that one school district where the kid was invited to be the teacher for the other students, and that's very remarkable. And Milton, you mentioned how there's lots of schools that are actually doing amazing things, but I guess I have this question about scale. So you all have both worked in amazing places that are really seeking to change education systems. And so I was just curious where you are at this point in your thinking about the power or the potential of the out-of-school time world, or the non-formal education world, actually changing our formal education system. Is it possible? Or should we focus more on just trying to link the experiences, or where are you in your thinking? Because you all have both seen such amazing different projects.
I've seen change happen, and in a way that, I think change of this type, especially for public education, is incremental. But the increments actually are fairly innovative. And so right now, in the last couple of years, there's a recognition that actually out-of-school time counts. And that wasn't the case 5 years ago with school systems, that there is a recognition that the learning that happens in out-of-school can count and can be of high quality. And so one of the projects that we're working on right now is actually thinking about how do we connect this to competency-based education. So the fact that you have that happening at the same time, and there are states right now who are very focused on the profiles and the portfolios and the competency-based education, places like New Hampshire, the State Department of Education in Michigan. They've actually are building badges as part of their 21st Century Learning Center initiative, and so they're piloting that now. So there are opportunities that didn't exist, and so I think it's taking advantage of those opportunities, but it's also for the after-school or out-of-school time programs to actually embrace the fact that they have to make it count, right? And sometimes it may not count, but there's some things that they do have to be accountable, and you can't have it both ways, which is what happens often.
My own comment about that is that scaling requires leadership. And now leadership can come from a variety of different places. When we first started our work at Edutopia, started making this website about 15 years ago, the stories that we would chronicle were individual teachers who were doing great things. And we would have thought that more teachers within their own school, right next door in their own classroom, will be doing more project-based learning. But without the principal as the leader of that school saying, this is important, let's learn to be a project-based learning school, that would be a lone individual teacher. So as the work progressed over the past 15 years, now we are seeing more of that principal leadership, districts moving towards us, some very courageous superintendents at the district level, some school boards. So amongst our 14,000 school districts, yeah, maybe we're not quite at half yet, but we're getting there. And my own observation is just in the past 4.5 years, I like to say that 2010 was really the first year of the 21st century in education. Because that's when we at Edutopia began to see a new receptivity to change. It's partly that the iPad had come out, low-cost, powerful digital tools, the cost coming down, and then also these ideas have been around for a while. So it's happening, and I think the next 5 years, really, by 2000, let's say 2020, you're going to see more change in this decade in the American educational system than you will have seen in the past 20 or 30 years. So this change is accelerating. It is slowly getting to scale. Here's a great quote. I don't know if you've been reading some of the quotes on the screens from Bill Gates. He said that people tend to overestimate the change that can happen in 2 years and underestimate the change that happens in 10 years. So his comment on that is, don't get complacent. If you don't see that change you want in 2 years, keep working at it. Yes. Grab a mic.
Thanks. I'm curious about what I would call sort of the democratization of learning in this process. One of the things that stands out to me about badging is that it definitely reflects the fact that we can create a better delivery system, but it is still a facilitated system. Someone has set the criteria for what constitutes a badge. And so there's a human element in here somewhere that says this is what you have to earn. The other is the wiki world approach. And I had a fascinating discussion with my son about this when I was, this shows you how far apart you can be on this. I was stunned and borderline angry in saying, how can you accept what's on Wikipedia? Because anybody can put something on Wikipedia. To which he said, well, if it's wrong, someone will correct it. And I said, but someone might get hurt before it's corrected. He said, but it will get corrected because the masses will correct it. That's mass democratization of learning. Will you ever have badges that are generated by popular learning, or is it still going to have to be a facilitated top-down approach?
I think that is what's happening. Yes, I do. So I think, one of the things about badges is we always say, it is not about replacing what already exists. We want to keep it weird. We want it to be about crowdsourcing. We want it to be coming from those folks who have the expertise, but also the issuers and the users of those badges who are going to find it valuable. So it has to be very much the Wikipedia approach, quite frankly, or it's just going to be the same as it's always been.
More comment in the back?
Thank you so much for what you both said. I really enjoyed it. One of the things that really stood out to me, Dr. Chen, was when you were talking about sort of the physical learning, incorporating more than neck up. And I was wondering, you talked about the opera, which is a great example. Can you give us more examples of programs like that are involved in the entire body?
Sure, yeah. One of my favorite examples, and certainly arts do that, music, dance, performance, theater. When you look at that film from Tucson, again, the film captures things that we cannot express in words, but when you see the look on the students' faces, you see the engagement, the excitement, that says a lot. And we're seeing a lot of programs, for instance, of getting kids into nature. The same technology that we're espousing today for learning can also have very negative effects, and we saw a slide earlier about how much time kids are spending with screens, and it is supplanting the time that they should be out in nature, in their communities, and using their entire bodies to learn. So I've been working with the national parks as we run up to the centennial of the national parks in 2016 to highlight more of how when young people are in these places, these authentic places where they can learn history, they can learn about science, these are our nation's most valuable ecosystems. There's very impressive projects going on with young people who are staying in a national park for a week. We call those the residential programs. So we're trying to tell more of that story of getting kids into nature as well. But it can begin with something as simple as a school garden. I'm very impressed by the progress that school gardens have made, our youngest students. And I know that school gardens are very popular here in Texas, and there are a number of foundations supporting them.
And I think a lot of the programs, the high school, especially work-based programs, are very interactive, you know. They may not be physical in the same way as going out and hoeing a garden, for example, but it's that real-world opportunity to interact with something that's going to make a difference that I think really helps the learning click and the interest build in kids.
Hi, I'm from Big Thought, and thanks to the support from Mozilla, we in Dallas piloted the Summer of Learning, or the City of Learning in Dallas this summer, and the findings are still coming out, but one of the things we're noticing is, especially with the middle school and high school students, even when you have a really high quality experience that's relevant to the student, and they gain a skill or knowledge badge that from the badge criteria means something, the kids still go, so what? And so I'm curious what you think are the most important things that need to happen in the corporate world, in the higher ed world, and elsewhere to make that badge currency elevated for the kids.
And I think it goes back to, I mean, your evidence is just back to what we've been finding out overall too, is that, no, the high school kids in particular, it's great to earn a badge, but they're not going to claim it unless they know that someone else that's going to value it's going to look at it. And so it could be for an internship, it could be working for an industry, it could be for high school and college credit too. So some of the other initiatives we've been working on what we really need next is some proof points in terms of industry and post-secondary education folks working with us. And we're doing a couple of projects on that right now. We're actually building the badges together with them. And so when a business says, you know what, I want young people coming to me that, that are creative, they're good team workers, they're good collaborators, et cetera, they're going to sit down with us and figure out exactly what that means, right? And how they would want that assessed and what they think the evidence would be behind it, so that they stand behind the badges and the evidence. So I think that's one of the next things that needs to happen. And we're doing some initiatives along those lines right now where we're collaborating with both post-secondary and industry to get to that point.
Just one more.
Yes, my name is Harold Thomas. I teach at a small liberal arts university. And one of the things that I've noted is that it looks like we're moving towards a commoditization of education, where we are really just teaching knowledge, but we're not reaching wisdom. And while we can teach these little pieces here and there, where are we going to pull this all together and to attach a value system to it, saying, yeah, you can do that? That's not a wise thing to do. I worry that we're going to end up teaching people a lot of knowledge, but precious little wisdom in the process. What are your thoughts on that? How could we continue to strive for wisdom in an environment where people are doing things just as they want, as opposed to having some larger thing in mind?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because the real goal of this should be to create a wiser generation of young people, and some of the values inherent in, for instance, our national park system. Sometimes when we talk about the value of getting kids into national parks, is not just the learning about science or the learning of history, but a value system that's inherent in the national parks. These are our nation's most important places, and they belong to all of us as citizens. It has to do with how we became a democracy. Glad that the Roosevelts are airing on PBS this week, and we're learning more about the initial thinking around conservation and historic preservation. So I think some of those values inherent in those kinds of experiences, getting into nature, perhaps more authentic learning, can lead to the kind of wisdom you're talking about, but it won't happen by accident. It has to be intentional, and some of the social emotional learning I was talking about can also contribute to that as well. Understanding who you are as a person, part of a family, as part of a community in this country, being able to contribute to your community, those are all parts of what we're trying to do.
And if you take just the simple web literacy map that I showed you as well, that's about teaching people how to make wise decisions. about how to use the web, how to use those resources, but you have to give people those basic skills first to know what to start with, and you have to give them the opportunity to make and do and make mistakes in order to get there. And I think that's actually part of how wisdom grows, and it grows over time. I'm sure I'm not going to be as wise as Milton for at least another 20 years.
Let's meet back in 20 years and check that. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because the liberal arts, we've talked a lot about STEM and the arts, but the liberal arts, of course, are an impressive way and an important way to get kids to wisdom. We don't want to shortchange the liberal arts at all. Great, well, please thank Ann May in particular for sharing her thoughts today.